Hi, I'm Kayla Coates. My talk's called Listen to the Smells of Distress. In moments of stress and injury, plants emit an organic compound called green leaf volatiles, or GLVs, as a warning sign to other nearby plants and insects. In her installation, Signaled to Nose, the artist Lindsay French used vaporizers to amplify plants' green leaf volatiles as olfactory emissions throughout the gallery space. Aside the plant odors, youth climate activist voices were broadcast as ambient sounds offering a verbal warning to visitors. I was enthralled by the idea of anxious plant smells as distress signals, immediately considering how the slow sensory experience of her show might benefit so many of us who live in perpetual anxiety. I wondered what other nonverbal affective responses go unnoticed or are misrecognized every day. What would mass distress smell like? In a typical conference setting, I would have introduced some of these odors to the room for us to collectively take in the bouquet of disturbances. But imagery, sound, and memory will have to suffice today in our current distanced reality. Actually, though, memory is critical to the relationship between GLVs and affect. Their aromas, such as that of freshly mowed grass, become nostalgically lodged into our memory as, at least for me, the first signal that summer has arrived. I began to consider how the work of green leaf volatiles becomes a kind of affective labor exploited from nature. Affective labor is generally work that is intended to produce or change emotional experiences in people. Spring and Truman identify it as the relationship between emotion and work, where, quote, affective labor produces commodities of care and comfort that are not physical objects, but still circulate and are consumed. Green leaf volatiles' emotion-producing function resides in the space of memory and a sense of well-being. Today, I'm going to draw connections between our multi-species olfactory emissions, building a concept map as inquiry process and pedagogical gesture, imaginatively considering a threshold between biochemical assemblages and affective labor. How does your body signal anxiety? Is it visible? Does your chest turn red? Do your cheeks blush? I sweat when I'm nervous. I stopped wearing colorful clothes when I teach because it's so visible, and it smells. What does my odor say about me? What is it signaling? I'm actually really attracted to body odor, but I know that many people aren't, so I try to mask it. Sweat is a biological response to temperature change, but stress sweat is different. Normal sweat is made up of water, salt, and potassium, which does not necessarily have an odor. Stress sweat, on the other hand, is a thicker, milkier secretion made of fatty acids and proteins that does not evaporate as quickly. It combines with bacteria on the skin to create an odor. The biochemical process is similar to the production of the atmospheric smell after a rainfall. Rain mixes with glandular oils on the surface of plants, vitalized by electricity in the air and bacteria on the ground to create the smell before and after rain, often identified as petrichor. I wondered if the electrical charge created during a storm is similar to my nervous energy, and if it strengthens the stress odor. The difference between rain, sweat, and GLVs points to a spectrum of intensity between disturbance and distress as a biochemical assemblage versus a mode of communication. Rain is produced from an ecological disturbance, and the smell associated with it emerges from a biochemical assemblage of ecological elements, whereas GLV scents are a form of multi-species communication. It seems that one is an effect, while another is an affect. Jane Bennett explores this idea of electric and affective currents, suggesting that, quote, subliminal gravitational pulls and electric flows are waves of underdetermined affect that do not tend toward the good or evil. They form a realm of real incipients, vague affects, and proto-desires or sensations, of not quite lived potentials of futurity. Bennett's articulation of future-oriented affect is important to the question of both mammalian anxiety and volatile compound signals as sociobiological processes rooted in anticipation of events yet to come. Unlike the romanticized smell of rain, the odor created from stress sweat is unwelcome. I feel pressure to mask my body's smells as my biological responses become entangled with social pressure. That musky smell says too much, signaling that I'm unclean, uncivilized, or lacking composure. But why are these bodily signals undesirable? They often mean that I care about the people around me, or at least I care what they think. Why is that a sign of weakness? How else have we habituated our bodies to mute affection or mask compassion and connection? How has cultural pressure to silence affective responses diminished our capacity to take them up as incipient proto-desires or potential futurity? Here, we're enculturated to cover the smell of our bodily signals while we produce synthetic aromas of other life forms, such as petrichor, basil, and lavender. I've heard that basil is shocked before being packaged to activate the oil secretions, intensifying the distress to fulfill consumer desire. The extraction of affect as production is a multi-species phenomenon, often occurring in relationships built on persuasion. For instance, teaching is rooted in affective labor and production, where intensive currents produce effects that echo the complex biochemical assemblages of storms and GLV signals. Sometimes pedagogical disruption is idealized as vitality in the classroom or creating a shock to thought. Teachers exert affective influence, creating disturbances that generate desire and control behavior. At the same time, teaching is frequently rooted in distress, carrying the heavy weight of trauma as a mode of caring and nurturing students, while masking our emotional responses. Where does disruption in the service of learning, curiosity, and concern reach a threshold of distress? Anxiety is a future-oriented emotion, one rooted in the anticipation of an unknown future. What potential futures do we eliminate by masking our distress signals? The distress of teaching is like that of the GLV, where I signal a danger warning. It's a warning often brought on by caring too much, of carrying others' trauma, the weight of expectations, pain, and frustration. I signal the fear of unmet desire. Over time, my compassion receptors are diminished. A similar effect is happening to greenleaf volatiles, which are becoming muted and confused by environmental pollutants that create stress and induce excessive plant emissions, reducing their signaling effectiveness. This shared condition of incessant and accelerated environmental stimulants has exhausted our capacity to respond. I wonder how we find a way to resituate our receptors away from the noise, to hear our mutual interspecies signals of pain, stress, and fear. As we sit across this screen from each other today, you can't smell the effect your presence is having on me. The corporeal limitations of this conference are indicative of the many ways our more than human hormonal communication is hindered at this moment of societal isolation. What if our current inability could illuminate our potential to value that which is often exploited, overlooked, and erased? How might we create a different kind of socius? One that embraces a capacity to hear the underdetermined multi-species affects transmitted as a network of distress and anxiety, outside of a transactional capitalist logic of production and consumption, as one step in not relinquishing this atmospheric realm to the capitalists. Or, as Spring and Truman suggested, we dislodge affective labor from capitalism. I'm appealing to an attentiveness to underdetermined affects as more than human communication and compassion, listening to the smells.